The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens of Clarence House. Charles stood at the edge of the terrace, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the guests mingle below. The annual charity garden party was in full swing, with over 200 distinguished guests enjoying afternoon tea and gentle conversation. Camilla moved gracefully through the crowd, her cream-colored dress flowing as she stopped to chat with various dignitaries and charity representatives. She had perfected the art of royal small talk over the years, making each person feel as though they were the most important guest at the gathering. Her laugh carried on the warm breeze, melodic and genuine. Near the rose garden, Kate stood with a small group of young mothers who ran a local children's charity. Her navy blue dress was simple yet elegant, and she listened intently as the women shared stories about their work with underprivileged families. Kate's eyes sparkled with genuine interest, and she occasionally reached out to touch someone's arm in a gesture of comfort or understanding. Charles descended the stone steps slowly, nodding to guests who bowed or curtsied as he passed. His mind was elsewhere, though he maintained his practiced smile. The weight of recent months pressed heavily on his shoulders. The transition to his new role as king had been more challenging than he had anticipated, filled with difficult decisions and family tensions that seemed to grow stronger each day. As he walked through the garden, Charles found himself drawn to different conversations. He paused near a group discussing environmental conservation, one of his lifelong passions. The elderly gentleman leading the discussion recognized him immediately and began explaining their innovative water conservation project. Charles engaged warmly, his face lighting up as they talked about sustainable farming practices. 20 minutes passed quickly as Charles became absorbed in the technical details of solar-powered irrigation systems. When the conversation naturally concluded, he excused himself and continued his rounds. The afternoon was progressing beautifully, with gentle jazz music playing from the small ensemble positioned near the fountain. Camilla appeared at his side as he approached the main lawn area where most guests had gathered. She slipped her arm through his with practiced ease, and they moved together as a unit, stopping to greet the Archbishop and his wife, then moving on to chat with several members of Parliament. "The Hendersons seem quite pleased with the new community center funding," Camilla murmured quietly as they walked between groups. Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had worked hard behind the scenes to make good things happen. Charles nodded, but his attention had shifted to Kate, who was now kneeling on the grass beside a small child who had apparently fallen and scraped her knee. Kate's dress would surely be stained, but she seemed completely unconcerned as she gently examined the minor injury and spoke soothingly to the crying little girl. The child's mother hovered nearby, clearly embarrassed that her daughter had interrupted the royal gathering. Kate looked up and smiled warmly at the woman, saying something that immediately put her at ease. Within moments, Kate had produced a small packet of tissues from her purse and was helping clean the scrape while engaging the child in conversation about her pretty dress. Other guests had noticed the scene, and a small circle had formed at a respectful distance. Charles watched as Kate helped the little girl to her feet, then knelt again to be at eye level with her. Whatever Kate said made the child giggle, and she threw her small arms around Kate's neck in an impromptu hug. The crowd around them smiled and murmured approvingly. Kate rose gracefully, smoothing down her dress and checking to make sure the child was truly all right before rejoining her previous conversation group. The entire interaction had taken perhaps 5 minutes, but Charles found himself still watching the spot where it had occurred. "She's wonderful with children," said a voice beside him. Charles turned to see Lord Morrison, one of his longtime advisors, who had also been observing the scene. "The people absolutely adore her. She has that natural touch that can't be taught." Charles murmured his agreement, though his throat felt strangely tight. He had always admired Kate's ability to connect with people, but today something about watching her felt different. Perhaps it was the way the afternoon light caught her hair, or the genuine joy on her face as she interacted with the guests, but he found his attention returning to her repeatedly. The garden party continued around them, with servers circulating among the guests, offering delicate sandwiches and perfectly arranged pastries. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the gentle clinking of fine china. Charles and Camilla made their way through the crowd systematically, ensuring they spoke with representatives from each of the featured charities. As they approached the area where Kate was standing, Charles noticed she was deep in conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric oncologist who ran a foundation for families dealing with childhood cancer. Kate's expression was serious and compassionate as she listened to Dr. Chen describe the emotional support programs they provided. "The siblings often struggle the most," Dr. Chen was saying. "They feel forgotten, while all the attention focuses on their sick brother or sister. We've developed specific programs to help them process their feelings." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "That must be incredibly difficult for such young children to understand. How do you help them express what they're feeling when they might not even have words for it?" The conversation continued as Charles and Camilla joined the small group. Charles found himself genuinely interested in Dr. Chen's work, but he was also acutely aware of Kate's thoughtful questions and the way she seemed to instinctively understand the emotional complexities of the situations being described. When Dr. Chen finished explaining their art therapy program, Kate immediately offered to visit their facility. "I'd love to see the children's artwork," she said. "And if there's any way I can help amplify your message or support your funding efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out." Dr. Chen's face lit up with gratitude and excitement. They exchanged contact information, and Charles could see that this was more than polite royal interest. Kate was genuinely committed to following through. As their conversation wound down, the late afternoon sun began to cast a golden glow across the garden. Most of the formal presentations had concluded, and the atmosphere became more relaxed. Some guests had begun gathering in smaller, more intimate groups, while others strolled through the flower beds, admiring the carefully maintained displays. Charles found himself separated from Camilla, who had been drawn into an animated discussion about historic preservation with several members of the National Trust. He stood for a moment, surveying the scene with satisfaction. The event had been a success by any measure. Meaningful connections had been made, important work had been highlighted, and substantial funds had been raised for worthy causes. Yet something felt unsettled within him. He couldn't quite identify the source of his unease, but it had been growing throughout the afternoon like a distant thunderstorm slowly approaching. Perhaps it was the way Kate seemed to effortlessly embody everything he hoped the monarchy could represent: genuine compassion, authentic connection with people from all walks of life, and an ability to use privilege in service of those who needed it most. The afternoon was drawing to a close, though many guests seemed reluctant to leave the beautiful setting and warm atmosphere. Charles knew that soon he would need to make his closing remarks, thanking everyone for their attendance and support. It was a ritual he had performed countless times, but today the prospect felt somehow significant in a way he couldn't explain. As he prepared to gather the crowd's attention, Charles caught sight of Kate once more. She was saying goodbye to the young mother whose child had fallen earlier, and the little girl was shyly offering Kate a flower she had picked from one of the garden beds. Kate accepted it with the same gracious attention she might give to a priceless gift, tucking it carefully into her purse and promising to treasure it. The gesture was small, almost invisible among all the afternoon's interactions, but it seemed to Charles to capture something essential about who Kate was and what she brought to their world. As he watched her gentle interaction with the child, he felt a shift within himself that he couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore. The weeks following the garden party passed in their usual rhythm of official duties, private meetings, and formal engagements. Charles maintained his regular schedule, yet found his thoughts returning repeatedly to that golden afternoon. He told himself it was simply because the event had been particularly successful, but deeper reflection revealed something more complex stirring within him. During a quiet evening in his private study, Charles sat reviewing correspondence when his secretary brought in the latest batch of thank-you letters from the garden party attendees. Among them was a handwritten note from Dr. Chen expressing her gratitude and mentioning that Kate had already scheduled a visit to the pediatric facility. Charles set the letter aside, but found himself reading it again several minutes later. The following Tuesday, Charles had a previously scheduled meeting with William to discuss several upcoming royal engagements. They met in the comfortable sitting room at Clarence House, where afternoon light streamed through tall windows. William seemed particularly energetic, discussing plans for a new environmental initiative with obvious enthusiasm. "Kate's really excited about the Children's Hospital project," William mentioned casually as they reviewed the calendar. "She spent the entire weekend researching childhood cancer support programs. You know how she gets when she finds a cause that really speaks to her." Charles nodded, remembering Kate's focused attention during her conversation with Dr. Chen. "She has a remarkable ability to connect with people's real needs," he observed. William smiled with obvious pride. "She does. Sometimes I think she understands the emotional side of this work better than any of us. She sees what people actually need, not just what we think they need." Their conversation continued for another hour, covering various official matters, but Charles found his mind drifting to William's words about Kate's natural empathy. He had always respected her dedication to her royal duties, but recently he had begun to notice something deeper in her approach, a kind of authentic compassion that seemed to come from somewhere genuine within her rather than from a sense of obligation. That evening, Charles attended a state dinner at Buckingham Palace. Camilla looked elegant in deep emerald green, and she moved through the evening with her usual grace and diplomatic skill. Charles watched her charm the visiting dignitaries with practiced conversation about their country's cultural exports and trade relationships. Across the room, Kate wore a stunning midnight blue gown that caught the light from the chandeliers, but what drew Charles's attention was not her appearance, but the way she engaged with the wife of the Italian ambassador, who seemed nervous and uncertain about the formal protocols. Kate somehow managed to put the woman completely at ease while maintaining perfect diplomatic etiquette. During the dinner, Charles found himself seated between the French Minister of Culture and a prominent British businessman. The conversation flowed easily through topics of mutual interest, but Charles became aware that he was occasionally glancing down the table toward where Kate sat. She was engaged in animated conversation with a young Spanish diplomat, and her genuine laughter seemed to light up their entire section of the table. After dinner, as guests mingled in the staterooms, Charles encountered Kate near one of the portrait galleries. She was studying a painting of Queen Victoria with obvious interest, her head tilted slightly as she read the small placard describing the historical context. "She was barely older than you when she became queen," Charles observed, joining Kate in front of the portrait. Kate turned with a warm smile. "I was just thinking about that. The responsibility must have been overwhelming. At least she had Albert to support her through it all." They stood together quietly for a moment, both contemplating the young face in the portrait. Charles found himself acutely aware of Kate's presence beside him, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way the gallery lighting highlighted the delicate line of her profile, the thoughtful expression in her eyes as she considered the weight of royal duty across generations. "Sometimes I wonder what she would think of how the monarchy has evolved," Kate continued softly. "Whether she would approve of how we try to balance tradition with connecting to people's real lives today." Charles was struck by the depth of her reflection. "I think she would admire your approach," he said, then immediately wondered why he had spoken so personally. "The way you bring genuine caring to the role, I mean. That's something that can't be taught or practiced. Kate looked at him with surprise, perhaps at the directness of his compliment. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a great deal coming from you." Their conversation was interrupted when Camilla appeared with several other guests who wanted to hear about the palace's art collection. Kate gracefully joined the small tour group, but Charles found himself watching her animated explanations about the historical significance of various pieces. The evening concluded successfully, with positive feedback from all the diplomatic guests. As Charles and Camilla rode home together in comfortable silence, he reflected on the evening's interactions. Everything had gone smoothly, yet he felt unsettled in a way he couldn't quite explain. Over the following days, Charles found himself thinking more frequently about his conversations with Kate. There had been something in her thoughtful questions and genuine interest that stayed with him. He began to notice things he had previously taken for granted: the careful attention she paid to briefings before public appearances, the way she remembered personal details about people she had met months earlier, her ability to make even formal events feel somehow warm and approachable. During a family lunch the following Sunday, Charles observed Kate as she helped serve the meal and engaged in easy conversation with various family members. She had a natural way of drawing people out, asking questions that showed genuine interest in their lives and experiences. Even the staff seemed more relaxed and cheerful when she was around. As they sat around the table after the meal, Kate mentioned her upcoming visit to Dr. Chen's facility. "I'm really looking forward to meeting the children and seeing their artwork," she said. Dr. Chen explained how art therapy helps them express feelings they can't put into words. It sounds incredibly powerful. Charles found himself asking detailed questions about her plans for the visit, and Kate responded with obvious enthusiasm and carefully thought out ideas for how she might be most helpful. Her preparation was thorough, but more importantly, her motivation seemed to come from a genuine desire to make a meaningful difference rather than simply fulfilling a royal obligation. After lunch, as family members dispersed to various activities, Charles found himself walking in the garden with Kate while the others remained inside. The conversation flowed naturally from her upcoming hospital visit to broader questions about the role of the monarchy in addressing social issues. "I sometimes worry that we're too removed from people's actual struggles," Kate confided, as they strolled past the rose bushes. "We can visit and offer support, but we go home to comfort and privilege while they continue dealing with difficult realities." Charles was touched by her honesty and the obvious wrestling she did with the complexities of their position. "The best we can do is use whatever platform we have to shine light on important work and support those who are making real differences," he replied. "But I understand the frustration with feeling limited." They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation ranging from specific charitable initiatives to broader philosophical questions about duty, privilege, and service. Charles found Kate's perspectives both thoughtful and challenging, and he realized he was enjoying their exchange more than he had enjoyed a conversation in quite some time. As they walked back toward the house, Kate mentioned something William had shared about a new environmental project they were considering. Her enthusiasm for supporting William's work was obvious and touching, but Charles found himself wondering what causes truly excited Kate herself, beyond her role as a supportive wife. That evening, after Kate and William had departed, Charles sat in his study with a book he had been meaning to read, but found his concentration wandering. The afternoon's conversation had revealed aspects of Kate's thinking that he hadn't fully appreciated before. Her questions about the monarchy's role were sophisticated and showed a depth of consideration that impressed him. More troubling was his growing awareness that he looked forward to these interactions with Kate more than he perhaps should. There was something about her combination of intelligence, compassion, and authenticity that drew him in ways he wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging. As the weeks continued, Charles found himself increasingly conscious of Kate's presence at family gatherings and official events. He began to notice the subtle ways she enhanced every situation she entered, how conversations became more meaningful, how people seemed more relaxed and genuine around her, how even formal events took on a warmer, more human quality when she was involved. The realization that was slowly forming in his mind was one he tried to push away, but it persisted with growing strength. Somewhere along the way, his appreciation for Kate's contributions to the family and the monarchy had evolved into something more personal and more complicated than he wanted to admit. The autumn gala at the Royal Opera House was one of the most anticipated social events of the season. The grand venue glowed with soft lighting, and the cream of British society filled the red velvet seats and elegant lobbies. Charles arrived with Camilla, both dressed impeccably for the formal occasion. Camilla wore a stunning burgundy gown that complemented her silver jewelry perfectly, while Charles looked distinguished in his tailored evening wear. Kate and William arrived shortly after, and Kate's appearance drew admiring glances throughout the room. Her midnight blue gown was simple yet striking, and she moved with the confident grace that had become her signature at such events. The two couples greeted each other warmly in the lobby before being escorted to the royal box. The evening's program featured a special performance of scenes from various beloved operas, performed by some of the world's most celebrated artists. As they settled into their seats, Charles found himself positioned with Camilla to his right and Kate diagonally across from him. From this vantage point, he could observe her reactions to the performances while maintaining appropriate conversation with the other guests in their box. During the first act, Charles noticed how completely Kate became absorbed in the music. Her face reflected genuine emotion as the soprano performed a particularly moving aria, and she seemed to forget entirely about the social expectations surrounding them. There was something deeply appealing about her authentic response to the art, her willingness to be moved without concern for maintaining a carefully controlled public persona. The intermission brought the usual round of socializing in the champagne reception area. Charles and Camilla worked the room together, greeting various dignitaries, arts patrons, and social luminaries. Their partnership in these settings was polished and effective, developed over years of practice. Camilla's wit and charm complemented Charles's more serious demeanor perfectly. Across the room, Kate and William were engaged in similar duties, but Charles found his attention drawn to a conversation Kate was having with Sir David Matthews, the elderly chairman of the Opera House's board. Sir David had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia the previous year, though he continued his involvement with the arts organizations he had supported for decades. Charles watched as Kate spoke with Sir David with obvious respect and patience, never showing any sign of frustration when he repeated himself or lost track of their conversation. She seemed genuinely interested in his stories about the Opera House's history, asking thoughtful questions that helped him stay focused and engaged. When Sir David's wife approached to gently redirect him, Kate included her seamlessly in the conversation, making the transition feel natural rather than awkward. The interaction lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but Charles was struck by Kate's natural grace in handling what could have been an uncomfortable situation. She had somehow managed to make Sir David feel valued and heard while respecting the challenges his condition presented. It was the kind of instinctive compassion that couldn't be taught or practiced. When the lights dimmed for the second half of the performance, Charles found his mind wandering from the music to reflections on what he had just witnessed. Kate's interaction with Sir David reminded him of similar moments he had observed over recent months. Her patient attention to elderly guests at receptions, her gentle way of including shy children in conversations, her ability to make people feel truly seen and appreciated. The final performance piece was a dramatic scene from La Traviata, with the heroine facing her tragic fate with dignity and grace. Charles glanced toward Kate and saw that she was moved by the performance, her eyes bright with unshed tears. There was something about her emotional openness that he found both touching and somehow brave in their world of controlled public appearances. As the evening concluded and they prepared to leave, the two couples found themselves together in the lobby saying their goodbyes to various guests. The crowd was beginning to thin, but several groups lingered, reluctant to end such a beautiful evening. During a quiet moment while William spoke with the opera house director, Charles found himself standing near Kate as they watched the remaining guests filter out into the London night. The lobby's elegant lighting cast a warm glow over the scene, and the evening felt suspended between the formal world they had just inhabited and the return to private life that awaited them. "It was a beautiful performance," Kate said softly, her voice still carrying some of the emotion from the evening's music. "Yes," Charles agreed, then found himself adding, "You seemed quite moved by the final aria." Kate smiled, a bit embarrassed. "I've always been too easily affected by music. William teases me about crying at performances, but I can't help it when something is truly beautiful." Charles was struck again by her honesty and lack of pretense. "I think that's a gift," he said quietly. "The ability to be genuinely moved by art, to let it affect you without worry about appearances." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the final guests make their way toward the exits. Charles was acutely aware of Kate's presence beside him, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way the lobby's lighting highlighted the elegant line of her neck and shoulders. "Charles," she said suddenly, turning to face him, "I wanted to thank you for something." He looked at her with surprise. "What for?" "For the way you've supported my work with the children's charities. Your encouragement has meant more than you might realize, especially when I was still finding my footing in all of this." Charles felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "You've never needed much guidance," he managed. "You have remarkable instincts for this work." Kate's smile was warm and genuine. "That's kind of you to say. I know I still have so much to learn about the responsibility we all carry, but having your confidence helps enormously." At that moment, Camilla appeared at Charles's side, having finished her conversation with Lady Morrison about an upcoming charity auction. "Ready to head home?" she asked pleasantly, slipping her arm through Charles's with practiced ease. William also rejoined them, and the four of them moved toward the entrance where their cars waited. The evening air was crisp and clear, with the sounds of London traffic providing a gentle backdrop to their conversation about the night's performances. As they reached the point where they would part ways to their respective vehicles, there was the usual round of warm goodbyes. William shook hands with Charles and kissed Camilla's cheek, while Kate embraced Camilla with genuine affection. Then came the moment that would replay in Charles's mind for weeks afterward. As Kate turned to say goodbye to him, something in her expression or the way the streetlight caught her features caused him to extend his arms toward her without conscious thought. It was a gesture born of impulse rather than protocol, reaching for an embrace that went beyond their usual formal interactions. The group seemed to freeze for an instant. William's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise, while Camilla's smile became fixed and uncertain. Kate herself looked momentarily confused, glancing quickly between Charles and the others as if trying to understand the sudden shift in the evening's carefully orchestrated social dynamics. Charles realized immediately that his gesture was inappropriate and unexpected, but in that suspended moment, he couldn't seem to withdraw his arms or explain his actions. The evening's emotional undercurrents, his growing awareness of his feelings toward Kate, and the lingering effects of the beautiful performances had somehow combined to override his usual careful self-control. Kate, with her characteristic grace, stepped forward to accept the embrace, but her movement was hesitant, and her expression remained puzzled. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but it felt simultaneously too brief and far too long. When they separated, Charles could see questions in her eyes that he wasn't prepared to answer. Camilla recovered first, her social instincts taking over to smooth the awkward moment. "Well, it really was a lovely evening," she said brightly, though her voice carried a slight strain. "We should do this again soon." The goodbyes concluded quickly after that, with everyone seeming eager to escape the strange tension that had settled over their small group. As Charles and Camilla rode home in their car, the silence between them stretched uncomfortably. Charles stared out the window at the passing London streets, acutely aware that something significant had shifted in that moment outside the opera house. "That was an interesting evening," Camilla finally said, her tone carefully neutral. Charles nodded, but didn't trust himself to speak. The memory of Kate's confused expression haunted him, along with the growing realization that his feelings had become impossible to hide, even from himself. The careful boundaries he had maintained for months had crumbled in an instant of unexpected vulnerability. Back in his study later that night, Charles sat alone with a glass of brandy, trying to process what had happened. The embrace itself had been brief, and could perhaps be explained as an overly affectionate gesture between family members. But he knew it had been something more, driven by feelings he had been fighting to suppress for longer than he cared to admit. The question that troubled him most was not whether others had noticed his momentary lapse in judgment, but whether Kate herself had understood the deeper emotion behind it. The thought that he might have made her uncomfortable or compromised her position filled him with regret and self-recrimination. As the clock in his study chimed midnight, Charles acknowledged to himself what he had been trying to deny for weeks. Somewhere along the way, his admiration for Kate's character and abilities had evolved into something much more complicated and potentially destructive. The room had indeed fallen silent when he reached for Kate, instead of naturally turning to Camilla, and that silence spoke volumes about a truth he was no longer able to hide from himself or others.